Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about the beautiful and very delicate balance between archers and knights in Age of Empires 2. Now when people talk about game balance, whether it be for Age of Empires or any other game, it's usually to highlight some inconsistencies or just flat out problems with the design or the balance. Things being too broken, others being too weak, and anything else you might think of, but it usually always has that negative tone because most people just care for the balance once there's a problem or once something's out of line, because that's when it becomes noticeable and that's when it becomes in your face and you can't have fun without this problem being addressed. And that's why they start to complain about it or start to point it out. However, in this video, I will be highlighting the best and most delicately balanced unit relationship in the entire game of Age of Empires 2, and potentially one of the best amongst other games as well. And this is the balance between the archer line in comparison to the knight line. Now, Age of Empires 2 does not have that many generic unit lines, units that most or if not all civilizations get access to. So it's no surprise that the archer and the knight line are the two most popular in the game. Now, certain civilizations could be missing some techs in the archer line or the knight line, be it the upgrades for the line itself or some blacksmith upgrades or some other, supporting upgrades that benefit these two unit lines. But even with that out of the way, if we just look at these two units and their lines in a vacuum, we can see a very, very nice balance between them. Now, you might think that the equivalent to the archer line is actually the scout line, since both of those units are available starting in the Feudal Age and they get an upgrade in Castle Age and Imperial Age. However, this is not the case, because the main difference is the archer is a gold costing unit, whereas the scout line is not. So in my opinion, and you can see this by playing the game or by analyzing it a little further, the scout line and its balance is linked mostly to halb and skirmisher, so to the spear line and to the skirm line. And this is mainly for balance reasons around games that run out of gold. These three units have to kind of form a rock, paper, scissors relationship where they can each counter one unit and get countered by another unit. So when thinking about it from this angle, we can see that the scout line is not linked to the archer line in terms of balance, although they do interact quite frequently in the Feudal Age and early Castle Age, and especially in late game if there's Hussar, for example. But just because they interact a lot does not mean that they're going to be intertwined when talking about balance. Okay, so back to the archer and the knight line. Now, obviously the archers are available in Feudal Age, but I would argue that this is actually part of the design that makes the balance so strong. Let's go through it step by step and analyze exactly what's going on here. So the archer line is available in the Feudal Age and it lets you make the archers. You can mass a lot of them in Feudal Age and you can, trade against your opponent and whatnot, and you're going to be able to build up a significant army size of archers by the time you hit Castle Age and by the time your opponent hits Castle Age. However, your opponent, if he hits Castle Age, will be able to make knights instantly. He does not require an upgrade, and he will be able to bring them out right off the bat. However, that comes to the downside that he couldn't mass them before getting to Castle Age. So you always have the numbers advantage going into early Castle Age. So because you can mass the archers in Castle Age, the advantage that the knight player has is that if he gets to Castle Age first, he can make a few knights right off the bat, and the knights do incredibly well against the archers. They outclass them heavily, but only if there's a caveat that the knight player has the correct upgrades, and this is specifically stuff like bloodlines to give extra HP and stuff like armor to make them tankier. If your opponent gets a couple knights on the field and you have 10 to 15 archers and he doesn't have any upgrades, you will melt through those knights as if they're scout cavalry with a couple upgrades. They are not that formidable because they have only 2 pierce armor. If he gets 1 armor upgrade, the balance is, a little bit tough. The knight player is going to be stronger, but if you have a lot of archers, you can kind of trade and maybe kite back enough to buy yourself some time. And if he's got +2 armor on them, if he's really committing to knights, then you are in big danger because your archers from Feudal Age will only do 1 damage per shot, rendering them basically ineffective. And so this is the advantage that the archer player has compared to the knight player when analyzing Feudal Age to early Castle Age. Archer player can mass them earlier, the knight player has that power spike where he can get to Castle Age and kind of bully the archer player if they're not yet in Castle Age. Once the archer player does hit Castle Age, they have another small disadvantage. They actually have to upgrade their units in terms of the main line. They have to get the crossbowman upgrade, which gives them an extra attack and an extra range and a little bit of extra HP as well. And this upgrade is obviously a good thing. You need to be able to pick it up to compete with the knights, but it does feel like a bit of a downside because it costs some money, and you have to invest a little bit of food and gold into getting that upgrade on top of having to get Botkin Arrow and other upgrades from the blacksmith. So in early Castle Age, once both the archer player and the knight player are in Castle Age, now you have the most interesting part of the relationship. If both players have low numbers, then the knights will most certainly win because the archers will not be able to do enough damage to the knights, and the knights will be able to close the gap and pick them off. So if both have low numbers, the knights will win. Fair enough. But hey, the archer player should not have lower numbers compared to the knights. He should have more because he's able to mass them from the Feudal Age. And this is very logical, and this is why in early Castle Age, generally speaking, the archer player will actually be stronger because he's got the upgrades now with crossbow crossbow and bodkin kicked in. Ballistics and thumb ring not yet, we'll talk about them later. So he's gonna have more archers on the field, early castle age moving forward. He will probably be able to beat the knights because the knight player does not have enough time to mass 10 to 20 knights. He'll probably be playing with like 4 to 6 with a few upgrades potentially on them, but nothing too spectacular. And in that situation, the crossbow player will win the fight. However, the archer player cannot actually force the fight. The knights have the mobility advantage, so the knights don't actually have to fight the crossbows unless you're pressuring certain key areas of your opponent's base and threatening to kill villagers to force the knights to engage. But you can't jump on the knights and force them to take the engagement when there's no other threats on the line. This is an amazing balanced design because while you're going to be stronger with the expos and you're going to be moving forward and pressuring your opponent, the knight player can use his mobility and his stronger individual units to stall, snipe reinforcements, or even counterattack while you're busy sitting in the middle of the map or moving forward. So if you're not smart and calculated with your crossbows, you can risk moving out and then getting picked apart at home, and you can't defend yourself because now you're in the middle of the map or closer to your opponent's base. So the knight player, while having the weaker head-on-head fight, can actually get more done if he plays it strategically. And so this is exactly why you see in lower levels and in beginner play especially, the melee units, the knight players usually are dominant because it's way harder to be strategic with a force that does not have the mobility advantage. You have to be smart with how you move out. You have to always make sure you have a backup plan. You have to track your opponent's units, whereas the guy with the knights can just run around. He can pick his battles if he wants to, or he can go for the counterattacks. If he enters into a bad fight, he can easily pull away and minimize his losses. The knight has so many advantages that are just hidden in its mobility and in the fact that it's a faster unit than the archer line. So this all sounds quite dire for the archers. You know, you are stronger than your opponent and you can't really do much with it in certain cases. You have to try to force on your opponent and try to threaten villagers to get him to take a fight that's favorable for you. That seems really hard. So what can the archer player do going into late castle age to get some more advantages? Well, this is where they have a couple decisions that they can make. They can pick up ballistics, which helps them hit moving targets, or they can get thumb ring, which lets them fire faster and with more accuracy, allowing them to do more DPS. Both of those upgrades are fantastic. However, they're extremely expensive, and this is by design. If ballistics and thumb ring were cheap upgrades that you can pick up as conveniently as something like bodkin arrow, the knights would have no chance in this relationship whatsoever, because if you can get thumb ring and ballistics and also charge at your opponent, the knight player no longer has that leeway to snipe reinforcements or to counterattack, because you will have ballistics on your town centers, ballistics on any reinforcements. If the knights run into a place that's a bit dangerous, they will be taking damage even if they try to run out immediately, because the ballistics will allow the TC and the archers to hit moving targets, making the knight player's life very, very miserable. So because these upgrades are quite expensive, you can only pick them up in mid and late castle age, and going for them early is possible, but it will set you back economically, and your opponent can then go for other options like a siege workshop or skirmishers to counter you getting those techs, and so it won't become the knight's responsibility to deal with ballistics and thumb ring crossbows in your early castle age. If you're committing to that, you're going to be pretty all in. Your opponent can invest into something to help defend and buy himself some time. It's no longer just knights on the field at that point. So okay, mid castle age, late castle age, we're going to be teching into ballistics and thumb ring. What is that knight player doing? He doesn't get any extra techs that he can pick up besides something like husbandry, which is not the craziest power spike. Well, this is where another key factor of the nature of knights kicks in. In late castle age, you would just mass more knights. You don't need to get ballistics or thumb ring. There's no equivalent to those techs for the knights. So what you do with the knights is, instead of getting techs like that, you just mass more of them. And this doesn't sound like it's that spectacular. You're massing more knights. Well, the expo player, the crossbow player, is also massing more crossbows. What's so special about getting more knights? Well, this is where the knights can actually turn the table just by using their superior in close combat ability compared to the crossbow. If you've got enough knights, you can actually force the engagement on the crossbows. Sure, with a large mass of crossbows, they will pick up 1 or 2 knights as you try to run in. And in fact, if you're a talented player, you can actually use formation hotkeys and split and regroup very fast to dodge these projectiles as you're running in to make these engagements even cleaner. But even if you don't do that, you might lose a few units on the run in. But as soon as you close the gap with enough knights, you will decimate crossbowmen in close head-to-head combat. You see, the crossbows are very squishy with only 35 HP and no base armor. So if the knights are getting on top of these crossbows and able to do a large amount of damage to these crossbows, you're going to be 3 or 4 hitting these crossbowmen depending on the techs that each person has. And so 3 to 4 hits for every crossbow to die. If you're looking at 20 to 25 knights up close, within a few seconds, that's going to be something like 20 to 25 crossbows dying. dying if you get the right surround. And even if you have a good amount of crossbows and you're hitting, one or two knights at a time and you're killing off one or two knights, you're probably going to be losing like 5 or 6 crossbows every time you kill one or two knights. And this ratio is not favorable for the crossbow in close combat, and the knights can easily take a sweeping fight and push everything back just by being able to close the gap with enough numbers. And so you run into situations where even if you've got something close to double the crossbows, if the knights get on top of you, they will win the fight. And so now you have, just with these 2 units, this whole game in of itself, the crossbow player trying to pick his battles, trying to fight at range, trying to bait the knights to run in and surprise them with something like pikemen, or get into a choke point, hide in a little oasis so the knights can't surround the crossbows, and so therefore the crossbows will win the fight. There's an entire game happening in this little mini game with archers versus knights. The knights are trying to get on top of the crossbows, and the archers are trying to use their range and the fact that they can all hit a single target at once to get favorable trades. Okay, so that's Castle Age. Now what happens moving into Imperial? In Imperial, it even gets better in my opinion. The Arbalest will have the advantage initially as it comes in quicker than the Cavalier upgrade, and it is accompanied by chemistry and bracer. And so if the Cavalier player gets Cavalier and the +4 armor from the blacksmith, you'll actually be dealing 1 more damage to the Cavalier with a fully upgraded Arbalest compared to a knight versus a crossbow in Castle Age. A knight versus a crossbow, the crossbow will deal 3 damage if both are fully upgraded in Castle Age. If both are fully upgraded in Imperial Age, a Cavalier will be taking 4 damage from the Arbalest. However, he does have 20 extra HP compared to the knight. The math is a little bit complicated, but essentially the Cavalier and the Arbalest is the same relationship as the knight compared to the crossbow. It's going to be very similar and play out in the same way. If the Cavalier can get the surround, they win. If they can't, they're going to lose at range versus the Arbalest. And the Arbalest will actually have an extra range to play with because the Arbalest tech does not give extra range, but Bracer does. So you have 1 extra range to play with in this relationship between Cavalier and Arbalest. The rest, as I mentioned, is exactly the same. However, this delicate balance is offset completely because the Cavalier get another upgrade for late Imperial Age, the Paladin. The Paladin is an amazing late game unit. Probably the best overall generic unit in the entire game, besides something cheesy like the Monk or Siege Onager. But head-to-head combat, the Paladin is spectacular. It's really fast, it's extremely strong, and it's extremely tanky. At 180 HP and a total of 7 pierce armor once all upgrades come in, you're only taking 3 damage from the Arbalest. So think about that relationship in Castle Age where the crossbow is dealing 3 damage to the knight. The knight only has maximum 120 HP. The Paladin has 180, 60 more HP than a knight, and taking the same damage that the knight took from the crossbow in Castle Age. So you can see just by doing the math that the Paladin is going to be way more tanky versus Arbalest than a knight is versus a crossbow in Castle Age. And that's not to mention that the Paladin will have a ton more attack than the knight had. So with all of those factors in play, the Paladin is absolutely destroying Arbalest in the late game. Now this might feel like the story ends on such a bad note for the Arbalest player. The Arbalest has no more upgrades and he's getting absolutely clobbered by the Paladin that's clearly superior in the late game. And is there anything the Arbalest player can do to deal with the Paladin and to slow down the raids from the Cavalry player? Well, the truth is, if you just stay on Arbalest alone, you're likely to have a very bad time versus a Paladin player. Both units cost gold, gold is a limited resource, and so both will eventually run out. But the Paladin is likely to take better trades against your Arbalest in head-to-head combat, and they have the added advantage of raiding your base. This is where AoE2 really comes alive as a strategy game. Remember, we're only analyzing these 2 units in a vacuum. This is where you have to tech into other options if you're the Arbalest player. You might have to commit to something like Heavy Camel, or more commonly, the Spear line via Halberdiers in Imperial Age. So this is why something like Arbalest plus Halberdier is a very classic combination, because the Arbalest on its own is just simply not enough to hold late game Paladin. And this is where then the Paladin player can respond with skirms, and then the Arbalest player responds with bombard cannons to deal with the skirms, or maybe hussars to send them in for raids and, snipe off some skirms that they're trying to reinforce. There's so many more factors that come into the game once this relationship gets broken, and it only gets broken in late imp when gold is becoming a factor. So the Paladin player does not have the luxury of always spamming Paladin. So he's got the strongest unit on the field, but it's coming at a downside. He's got to do something quickly, or else he might actually run out of gold and not be able to produce more of that very strong unit. The Arbalest player has the advantage in the sense that his Arbalest can be defended with non-gold costing units, and his Arbalest might be able to be protected enough so that the Paladin player can run out of gold and you can secure yourself a win. Obviously, Obviously, it's a very simplified version of what usually happens. There are so many other factors that take play, but that is maybe a topic for another video. I can't cover all the different scenarios in just this one, but we've already covered a fascinating scenario between the archers and the knights. So in conclusion, I really think that amongst all the problems that AoE2 might have in terms of balance, this is really where they absolutely struck gold. The balance between the archer line and the knight line is peak Age of Empires, and in my opinion, the entire game is balanced around these two units having such a close relationship and having moments in which the knight player is stronger and the archer player is stronger, and they've got a ton of other options to support each other and counter the opposing player. The archer has the option to mix in pikes, monks, and the knight player usually has the option to mix in skirmishers or siege. Both players have enough options to where they're never feeling completely outclassed, and they're never going to get overrun without making some kind of mistake or being out of position. And in the end, you're left with such an amazing situation where you have to make calculated decisions at every point in the game. You have to pick your battles in a smart and strategic manner, and in the end, it's usually the best player who wins, or the person who got lucky and sent in 20 knights through a hole and killed all the villagers of the archer player. That's just how it works sometimes. But that's gonna be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you guys did enjoy it. If you guys want to see more like this, let me know in the comments below, and if you guys have anything to add, also feel free to add your thoughts and your comments in the comment section below, and add to the discussion. If you guys want more content from me, check me out on Patreon for all the exclusive guides and content to try to get better at the game or understand AoE2 at a higher level, and check me out on Twitch for the live streams. Links to both Twitch and Patreon in the description below. Thank you so much for joining me on those platforms, and thank you so much for watching the video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay safe and peace.